The sound of the slap was loud and sudden in the courtroom, so much so that the American flag hanging in the corner almost seemed to jump. My mother's glasses flew off her face and skidded onto the smooth floor. My father's voice came right after, sounding cold and satisfied. "You've been useless your whole life." For a single second, the entire room was completely silent. I stood up from my seat, feeling the slight pull of my duty belt as I got to my feet. I took off my police cap and placed it carefully on the table in front of me, like a formal gesture. "Your Honor," I said, keeping my voice level. "Please check the last page." My father turned around to look at me, and all the color drained from his face when he recognized me. That specific moment had been building for a very long time. It all started when I was 8 years old, which is when I first understood that being quiet could be a form of defense. I remember the kitchen smelling like burned toast and coffee that had been heating for too long. It was winter, and the wind outside made tapping sounds against the window. My mother moved around the kitchen very cautiously, her long sleeves pulled down over her hands to hide the dark bruise on her wrist. She put 2 bowls of cereal on the table and managed a small, pained smile. "Eat before it gets soggy," she said. My father came in, walking heavily in his boots, seeming to bring a bad mood with him. "Where's my thermos?" he demanded. "On the counter," Mom answered. He grabbed it and his eyes immediately went to her sleeve. "Clumsy again." "I dropped a pan," she said. He snorted. "I'm sure you did." "Figures." His eyes passed over me and my sister Emily. "I'm not raising 2 princesses who can't do a thing." He pushed at the toast, making crumbs scatter. "Burned," he said. "Can't even make breakfast." When the door slammed shut behind him, the whole house felt like it could finally relax. Mom wiped the counter with a napkin as if she could clean away the tension in the air. "He's just tired," she whispered. "He doesn't have to be cruel," I said. "Finish up," she answered. "School starts soon." The wind was cold against our ankles on the walk to school. Emily's bootlaces were undone and dragging on the ground. "Is Mom okay?" she asked. "She's tough," I told her, saying the words as if they were a fact. In a shop window, a TV was playing, showing a police officer lifting yellow caution tape. The officer's face looked calm. There was no shouting, no fear. Something inside me felt like it clicked into place. That afternoon, the house smelled like cornbread. Mom touched my cheek. "How was school, Sarah?" "We read about Harriet Tubman," I said. "Being brave doesn't mean you have to be loud." "You're right," Mom replied. Dad came home late that night, and it was clear he had been drinking. His keys fumbled in the lock. He looked at the cornbread and then at Mom. "You trying to make up for this morning?" "It's cornbread," she said. "You like it with honey?" "I like a woman who knows her place." Suddenly, his hand moved fast and he slapped the plate right out of her grasp. It hit the floor and broke into many pieces. Emily screamed. I just watched the yellow cornbread crumbs scatter across the floor tiles, looking like decorations for a terrible event. "Stop," I said, even though I was told to be quiet. But it was like I had drawn a line. He turned, surprised that a child had spoken up. "What?" "Stop." He laughed, a mean laugh that smelled like beer. "Let's hear that." "She thinks she's a cop." Mom stepped between us so quickly it was like her shadow split me in two. "Please," she told him. "Go lie down. I'll clean this." He shoved past her. Mom crouched down and started picking up the broken pieces of the plate. I knelt down next to her. "You don't have to take this." She gathered the sharp fragments until their edges started to cut her skin. "You and Emily need a roof," she murmured. "If I leave, where do we go?" I didn't have an answer for her that wasn't just a childish fantasy. So I helped. We cleaned the kitchen, breathing together in the same rhythm like 2 people swimming under the same difficult wave. When we finished, she washed her hands and the water stung the cuts. She flinched, then shook them dry and gave me a small smile. At night, I started making lists to organize my thoughts. Facts, feelings, control. Fact, Mom was kind. Feeling, I was afraid. Control, I could learn to be calm. I could become the person who shows up and says, "Enough." On Sundays, when Dad was asleep all afternoon, Mom took us to the park. Emily pumped her legs on the swing, and I would time how high she went. Mom's bruises changed colors over time, like sunsets, fading from purple to brown to yellow, and then almost disappearing. But every time one mark faded, a new one would appear. It was a cycle that never seemed to end. One time, a police car drove by. A woman officer inside lifted 2 fingers from the steering wheel in a small wave. It felt like she was giving me a key. Someday, I decided, I would be that calm. I told Mom while we were folding laundry. I want to be a cop, I said. Vanessa, I want to be the person who shows up and says enough. She held a towel without moving, looking at me with the same seriousness she used for important matters. It's dangerous, she said. But danger doesn't scare you. Seeing people hurt and feeling like you can't do anything, that scares you. Her understanding me so well made my eyes water. I'll study hard, I said. I'll run every morning and learn the law. She brushed my hair back. Then do it, but promise me something. What? When you get strong, really strong, use that strength to protect people. Don't become the same kind of person that made you need to be strong. I promised her. Children make promises all the time, and many are forgotten. Mine wasn't. It survived every difficult moment in that house. It survived the slammed doors, the insults, and the apologies Mom seemed to make to the air. It survived the nights I held Emily in the closet while Dad was angry, looking for a fight he knew he could win. That promise stayed with me until a badge and a duty belt replaced the fear I had carried for so long. Years later, standing in that courtroom when I set my cap down, that childhood promise had become a strong resolve. But the process of making it strong began back then, with burned toast, warm cornbread, park swings, folding laundry, and quiet promises. People often think revenge is a loud and angry thing. The truth is much quieter. It's a girl learning the importance of a police cap and the sound a key makes when it unlocks a door. It's about being patient, organizing things no one else notices until the right moment comes and the person you've been working to become finally walks through the door. I learned to be quiet. I learned to take notes that no one expected would be read, to remember faces, and to use the right words as a tool, not as a weapon. I watched my mom use her kindness like sandbags, trying to hold back the flood of my father's anger. I saw what it cost her, visible in her worn hands. So when the slap happened in court and the room went silent, I wasn't just a daughter. I was a promise that had been kept. Your Honor, I said, check the last page. The echo of the courtroom was still fresh in my mind, but the memory that truly motivated me wasn't from a courtroom with wooden benches. It came from a small kitchen where steam rose from old pots and a woman with tired eyes tried to put hope into every meal she made. My mom was the kind of woman who could make a small amount of money last a very long time. She hid her bruises under her sleeves, covering them with makeup. To everyone else, she seemed quiet, maybe even weak, but I knew the truth. She was like steel that had learned how to bend without breaking. She put up with it all because of us. At night, after Dad went to bed, smelling like whiskey and smoke, she would stay up by a dim light, fixing Emily's torn skirt or ironing my school clothes. The iron made a hissing sound as she worked, her eyes half closed from exhaustion, but her hands were always steady. I just want you girls to have better, she would whisper when she saw me watching. Better. That word stuck with me, but better required sacrifice. I remember how she would stand at the grocery store holding a small calculator, trying to decide between buying bread or milk. Sometimes she would skip meals, telling us she wasn't hungry. We were too young to realize that going hungry leaves a mark. Why don't you leave him? I asked her once, my voice shaking. I must have been about 12. She stopped what she was doing at the sink, her hands in the dishwater. For a second, her back looked like a huge obstacle I couldn't get past. Then she turned around, her face soft but her eyes wet. Because leaving isn't free, Sarah. He'll take the house. He'll drag you girls through a long court battle. Sometimes staying is the only way to keep the problems contained within these walls. I hated that answer at the time, but I also understood it. Emily needed braces. I needed books for school. Mom took the abuse so that we could have a future. School became my safe place. I stayed late for the debate team, for track practice, or for anything else that would keep me away from the house. But every time the bus got to our street, my stomach would tighten. I never knew what I would find at home. Would Dad be there, waiting to criticize someone? Would Mom be hiding a new bruise? Emily once asked me, "Do you think she still loves him?" "No," I said, probably too quickly. Then I softened my voice. "She just loves us more." The affair started subtly, like smoke you don't notice until the whole room is filled with it. Dad started shaving more often, buying new shirts, and wearing cologne that was too strong for his factory job. His voice changed too, becoming smooth and secretive when he was on the phone. Mom would fold laundry with trembling fingers, her lips pressed tightly together. She knew what was happening. Wives always seem to know. But she didn't say anything. She just endured it, again holding on to silence as if it could keep the family from falling apart. I hated him even more for that. It wasn't just the cheating, it was the humiliation. It was the way he would come home late, whistling, while Mom served him dinner as if her own dignity wasn't being destroyed. One night, Emily burst into tears while doing her algebra homework. Dad barked at her, "Figures, useless, just like your mother." Before I could react, Mom crossed the room. She sat down next to Emily and put her arms around her. "You are not useless," she whispered firmly. "You are light. You are mine." Emily leaned against her, and I saw something important. Mom wasn't powerless. She fought back in her own small ways, by protecting us, by affirming our worth, and by planting seeds of self-esteem that Dad couldn't destroy. When I graduated from high school, Dad didn't come. Mom sat in the bleachers by herself, holding a bouquet of cheap carnations from a gas station. Her eyes were shining as if they were the most beautiful roses. "You did it, Sarah," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Every step you take from here is proof that it wasn't for nothing." I held my diploma tightly, feeling torn. For nothing? No, it was for everything. That night, after Emily was asleep, I whispered to Mom, "I'm going to the academy. I'm going to be a cop." She caught her breath. "Sarah, that's so dangerous." "I know," I said, "but it's my way out, and one day I'll have the strength to protect you too." Her eyes filled with tears. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her palm was rough and scarred from years of scrubbing, sewing, and just surviving. "Then promise me one thing." "What?" "When you stand in that strength, don't use it to destroy. Use it to heal what's left of us." I promised, but deep down, I knew that sometimes healing requires burning away the sickness first. Years passed. I wore the uniform. I learned the law, the weight of my equipment, and the power of self-control, but at home, Mom was still just enduring. Dad's mistress had become more demanding, whispering her poison. He started talking about selling the house, about starting a fresh life. "Fresh with her," I muttered one night when Mom told me about it, crying. Mom just shook her head. "I can handle losing him. But losing this home, the home I raised you girls in," her voice broke, "I can't bear that." I looked at her, her shoulders slumped, her hair streaked with gray much too early. She had spent her life protecting us, and now he wanted to take even the roof from over her head. That night, I started collecting things. I gathered receipts, photos, and statements from neighbors, all quietly and methodically. I wasn't acting as her daughter, I was acting as an officer. My mom had endured enough. Looking back, I realized that her endurance was both her prison and her protection. She chose to be silent so that we could have a voice. She accepted pain so that we could have dreams. And even though the world saw her as a timid person, I saw the bravest woman I knew. When she was in court, trembling so much her pen shook as she signed the papers that would end her marriage, I saw every single night she had stayed up for us. I saw every bruise she had hidden and every sacrifice she had made. And I knew this. Her endurance had bought us time. My strength would buy her freedom. The night everything finally fell apart didn't begin with a loud fight. It started with the smell of cheap cologne and cigarette smoke that was stuck to Dad's jacket when he stumbled in. I was home for a short visit from the academy, my new uniform still feeling stiff. Emily was at the kitchen table doing homework. Mom was at the stove, stirring soup that smelled like onions and garlic, her sleeves pulled down like always. Dad threw a folded stack of papers onto the counter. "Sign it." Mom turned, the ladle shaking in her hand. "What is this?" "Divorce," he said, as if it were nothing. "The girls are grown. You're not needed anymore." Emily dropped her pencil. "What?" Dad didn't even look at her. "Don't make it dramatic. It's overdue." Mom unfolded the papers with trembling fingers. Her lips moved as she silently read the words, then she pressed them together tightly as if trying to hold herself together. "I don't want this," she whispered. Dad's laugh was cruel. "You don't want it? Since when do you get to want anything? You think I'm asking? You'll sign." Her eyes looked toward us, the same look she always gave us, begging us not to interfere or make things worse. She had withstood every storm for us, but this one was about to destroy the entire house. Later that night, I found her on the back porch. She was sitting on the steps, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The moonlight showed the lines of exhaustion on her face. "I can't fight him, Sarah," she said quietly. "If he wants the divorce, he'll take everything, the house, the savings. I don't have the strength." "You don't have to fight him alone," I said. "You have me." Her smile was faint and tired. "You are my strength, but I can't drag you into this." I wanted to yell that she had dragged me into it years ago when I was just a child hiding from him. But I held back. Instead, I said, "He won't win, not this time." Inside, the phone rang. Dad's voice, low and eager, came through the screen door. He was using sweet words I'd never heard him use with Mom. He was talking to her, the mistress. My hands clenched into fists so tight they ached. The next morning, Mom tried to reason with him again. "We can work this out," she said gently. "For the girls, for Emily." His hand slammed the table, making the cups jump. "Don't talk to me about sacrifice. You've done nothing but hold me back." Her eyes widened, but she didn't cry. She just looked down, the way she always did. Something inside me broke. "Stop blaming her for your failures," I said, stepping into the kitchen. My academy badge was pinned to my shirt, and it caught the light. He turned around slowly, his smirk growing. "Look at you, pretending that badge makes you somebody. You're still just my little girl. You'll always do as I say." "No," I said, my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding. "Not anymore." The absolute breaking point came 2 weeks later. He came home, but this time he brought his mistress with him. She stood brazenly in our doorway with bright red lipstick and a smirk, as if she already owned the place. Mom froze in the living room, wringing her hands. Emily ran upstairs, her eyes wide with shame and anger. Dad waved the divorce papers again. "Sign or I'll make sure you get nothing. Not the house, not a cent. You'll be lucky if I let you keep your clothes." The mistress sneered, her hand on his arm. "Do it, darling. End this farce." Mom looked like she was about to faint. Her voice broke when she whispered, "Please don't do this in front of the girls." "Girls," he scoffed. "They're old enough to know their mother's worthless." That word, worthless, hit me like a knife. I had heard him use it my whole life, but hearing it now supported by this other woman set something off inside me. I stepped forward. "Enough." He turned, his eyes narrowing. "You don't tell me what to do." "Maybe not before," I said, standing straight. "But I'm not 8 years old anymore." That night, after Mom finally went to her room, sobbing, I sat at the kitchen table. The divorce papers were crumpled nearby. I smoothed them out and studied every line. And I made a decision. If he wanted a fight, I would give him one, but I wouldn't fight him as his daughter. I would fight him as an officer of the law. I started collecting everything. Old photographs of Bruce's hospital, receipts, police call logs, and even statements from neighbors about the loud fights. I kept it all in a locked file. Mom had endured for too long. The time for being silent was over. The last straw wasn't just the divorce, it was the smug look on his face, the belief that she would break just as easily as he could break a plate. He thought her endurance was weakness, but her endurance had given me time to become strong. So when the court date was set, I was ready. Mom was terrified, praying he might show mercy, but I knew better. Men like him don't stop until someone stops them. And I was going to be that someone. The little girl who once whispered "stop" in a broken kitchen had finally found her voice. The courthouse smelled like floor polish and old paper, like wood that had absorbed decades of anger and hope. Sunlight came through the tall windows, lighting up dust particles that floated in the air. The atmosphere was heavy, filled with the whispers of other people waiting for their own cases. For me, all the sounds just blended into the pounding of my own heart. Mom sat next to me at the table, her hands twisting a tissue. She wore her best dress, a blue one with faded flowers, trying to look respectable, but her eyes showed she hadn't slept. Across the aisle, Dad leaned back in his chair, acting like a man who thought he was above the law. His mistress sat beside him, her legs crossed and a small smile on her face. She was wearing so much perfume, I could smell it from across the room. The bailiff called the court to order and the judge entered. We all stood. I rose with them, holding my police cap against my chest. The proceedings started. Lawyers talked and papers were shuffled. But what I remember most is my father's voice. Confident and cruel, but covered with a thin layer of charm. "Your Honor," he said, gesturing at Mom, "this woman has contributed nothing. I paid all the bills. I maintained the house. She's had free lodging and meals for decades. Now she'll walk away with what she deserves, nothing." Mom flinched. The tissue in her hands tore. The judge turned to her. "Do you have anything to say, ma'am?" Her mouth opened, and for a second I thought she would speak. But then her shoulders slumped, just like they always did at home. I just want peace," she whispered. Dad smirked. "Exactly my point. She has no fight in her." The mistress let out a short, sharp laugh. Something inside me twisted, but I stayed quiet. Timing was everything. Halfway through, Dad got more confident. He leaned across the table, his voice too loud for the quiet room. "You hear that, boys? She's admitting she's useless." Mom sank into her chair, staring at the floor. Her fingers trembled as she signed the first document. The pen shook as she reached for the second page. That's when Dad leaned over, his face close to hers, and in a fast, practiced motion, he slapped her. The sound echoed off the walls. People gasped. The pen fell from her hand. "You've been useless your whole life," he spat. The bailiff started to move, but the judge held up a hand, his shock turning into cold anger. The room was deathly quiet. Mom's breathing was heavy, her cheek bright red. Even then, she picked up the pen with trembling fingers as if she would surrender just to make it end. I couldn't sit there any longer. My chair scraped loudly as I stood up. Every head turned to look at me. I stood up straight, feeling the years of training in my posture. I picked up my cap from the table and set it back down deliberately. "Your Honor," I said, my voice even but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Please check the last page." The mistress's smile vanished. Dad's eyes snapped to me, his anger mixing with the sudden confusion. "What are you doing?" he growled. "Sit down." But the judge was already flipping through the papers. My evidence was there, tucked at the very end. Photographs of bruises, sworn statements, hospital receipts, and copies of police reports I had accessed through official channels. Years of silence, all documented in ink. The judge's brow furrowed. "What is this?" I kept my voice calm. "The truth, Your Honor." A murmur went through the room. Dad shifted in his seat, suddenly not so confident. His mistress's perfume seemed to smell sour in the tense air. For the first time, Mom looked up at me, her face a mix of confusion, hope, and disbelief. I gave her the smallest nod. "It's okay. You're not alone." The judge cleared his throat, his eyes scanning every line. "These are serious allegations. Mr. Evans, you'll answer to them before this court." Dad's smirk was gone. "This is nonsense. Fabrications." His voice cracked. I stood straighter. "Every statement is verified, every photograph authenticated. The law does not ignore abuse, no matter how long it's been buried." The silence that followed was heavy. For years, silence had been my mother's prison. In that moment, it became my weapon. Every second that Dad's face grew paler was proof that her endurance had not been weakness. It had just been waiting. For a long moment after the judge finished reading, no one moved. The air felt like it could break. My heart was pounding. Then Dad slammed his palms on the table. His chair screeched. His face was red with rage. "You think you're something now wearing that uniform? You're nothing but my disobedient little girl." The mistress tried to grab his arm, but he shook her off. He started walking across the aisle toward Mom, who was still clutching the tissue. "Sign the papers," he hissed. "You don't get to embarrass me." The judge banged his gavel. "Mr. Evans!" But Dad wasn't listening. His arm whipped back, and before anyone could stop him, he struck her again. The sound was sharp. The bailiff lunged, but I was already moving. My chair fell over as I stood. I stepped right between my dad and my mom, my shoulders back, my pulse steady. "Enough," I said. The word wasn't loud, but it cut through the room. Dad's eyes met mine. He seemed surprised that I would openly defy him, that the child who used to hide was now blocking his path. "Get out of my way," he snarled. "No, I can't," I answered. The bailiff grabbed his arm, but he twisted free, still glaring at me. His hand rose again, the same hand I had seen raised so many times. But this time, I didn't flinch. "This is a courtroom," I said, my voice firm. "And the law will answer for what you've done." He froze, confused by the authority in my voice. All the years at the academy, all the training, all came together in that moment. I wasn't just his daughter. I was an officer. The judge's gavel cracked. "Bailiff, restrain him!" The bailiff snapped handcuffs onto Dad's wrists. He twisted and cursed, but the fight was gone. He looked smaller. The mistress looked uncomfortable, her perfume smelling awful in the still air. She tried to make excuses, but the judge silenced her. I turned back to Mom. She was trembling, the tissue now in tiny pieces in her lap. Her cheek was red. For a second, I felt like that little girl again, kneeling on the kitchen floor. Only this time, she wasn't alone. I knelt beside her. "It's over, Mom. You don't have to take it anymore." Her eyes filled with tears. She grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Sarah," she whispered. "You stood up." I swallowed, trying to stay composed for both of us. The judge cleared his throat. "This court will not ignore what has been brought to light. The evidence is compelling. Further proceedings will determine the division of assets. In the meantime, protective measures will be enforced for the plaintiff." Protective measures. Words Mom had needed for decades. The mistress stood up abruptly and, "This is absurd. He's the provider." The judge's gavel fell. "Sit down, ma'am." Dad struggled against the cuffs. "You think this changes anything? You think she wins because you wear a badge?" I turned to him, my expression calm. "This isn't about winning. This is about the truth. And you can't bury it anymore." For the first time, Mom lifted her chin. Her voice was quiet but steady when she said, "I won't be afraid anymore." "That is your right, ma'am," the judge said. "And this court will uphold it." I stood up. My cap was still on the table. I wasn't a girl hiding in silence anymore, and Mom wasn't a woman trapped by fear. The clink of the handcuffs seemed to settle in the room. The judge looked at me. "Officer Evans, you indicated there is additional evidence. Walk me through it." "Yes, Your Honor." My voice sounded strong. "What you have are 3 categories: documentation of abuse, financial misconduct, and witness statements." The clerk separated the files. First were the photographs, all dated. A swollen cheekbone, dark bruises on Mom's forearms, a split lip. The judge's expression hardened. "These images span 10 years," I said. "Most were taken by me, some by emergency nurses when my mother claimed she fell," Dad growled. But the bailiff's grip tightened. The judge pointed to the next file. "And the statements?" 4 neighbors, I said. 2 called 911 on separate nights reporting yelling, items being thrown, and a woman screaming. Both times, my mother refused to press charges, citing fear. She had 2 daughters sleeping down the hall. Mom squeezed my hand. Next, I said, my voice becoming more official, financial misconduct. I laid out bank statements, withdrawals that match hotel receipts and jewelry purchases, items never given to my mother. There are also cash transfers to a personal account held by Ms. Thorne. I believe gifts is the word you're reaching for, Ms. Thorne snapped. The judge didn't even look at her. Counsel will advise your client to remain silent. His eyes went to Dad. Were these transfers made with marital funds? My money is my business, Dad blustered. In a marriage, Mr. Evans, your money is our business, the judge replied. I turned the next page. There is also a quitclaim deed, drafted but not filed, to transfer the house to an LLC formed last year. The timing corresponds to Ms. Thorne's increasing presence. Alleged, Dad's attorney muttered. Documented, I said, sliding over the state filings. This was an attempt to strip my mother of the home she has maintained for 28 years. The judge read it, his face impassive. Why bring this now, officer, and not years ago? I took a breath. Because I was a child. Because my mother asked me to keep the storm inside our walls. Because some kinds of safety require timing. Today she asked for peace. This is the road to it. The clerk handed one more item to the judge. He opened it and paused. Audio recordings. Yes, Your Honor, legally obtained in a one-party consent state, I said. You'll hear Mr. Evans threatening to sell the house if my mother refused to sign and disappear. You'll also hear Ms. Thorne encouraging him to finish her off in court so they could start fresh. Ms. Thorne went pale. That's out of context. Context, the judge said, is what trials are for. He nodded to the clerk. The speakers crackled. My father's voice filled the room, cruel and slurred. She's had it good on my dime. She can take a bag and get out. Then Ms. Thorne's voice. Stop coddling her. File, win, and move me in. The house won't even remember her name. When the audio stopped, the room felt cold. The judge closed the file. Mrs. Evans, he said, you will not sign anything today. This court issues an immediate protective order. Mr. Evans, you are barred from the marital home pending a full hearing. A forensic accountant will evaluate the dissipation of marital assets. Dad jumped to his feet. You can't throw me out of my own house. I can and I am, the judge said. Sit down. A huge weight lifted from my shoulders. I put a hand on Mom's back. Thank you, she whispered. We're not finished, I told her. But you don't have to be afraid tonight. Dad stared at me, his anger fading into confusion. He had always believed he was all-powerful. Today, that belief was shattered. This court recognizes endurance, the judge said. It should not be mistaken for consent. We will reconvene. For now, the plaintiff is protected. He looked at me. Officer Evans, good work. Thank you, Your Honor. As the bailiff led Dad away, Ms. Thorne hissed, You'll regret this. He always lands on his feet. Not on our backs, I said. We left the courtroom. Outside, the sky was clear, the way it is after a big storm. Where will we go? Mom asked. Home, I said. Tonight, home is ours. She nodded. The red mark on her cheek was already starting to fade. People think revealing the truth is like turning on a bright light all at once. Sometimes it's more like lighting a house one room at a time until you realize there was always a way through. We had found the switches. The courthouse steps felt different on the way out. The air smelled crisp, like fall had finally arrived. Mom walked beside me, her hand shaking in mine, but this time it was from relief, not fear. Behind us, the heavy doors closed. Dad was still inside. For years, he had written our family's story with his anger. Today, that story ended. Mom took a deep breath, her first free breath in years. Sarah, she whispered, I never thought I'd see this day. I looked at her, at the lines of sacrifice on her face and the strength that had never really broken. You earned it, I said. Every bit of this freedom is yours. Her eyes were shining. No, we earned it. You stood up when I couldn't. I shook my head. Mom, you stood up every single day. You held this family together. I just carried what you taught me into that courtroom. That evening, we went back to the house. The silence inside felt different. It wasn't the silence of waiting for a fight, it was peaceful. Emily was already there. When she saw Mom's calm face, she rushed over and hugged her. He can't hurt you anymore, Emily whispered. Not anymore, Mom said. I watched them, feeling a peace I hadn't felt in years. Later, as Mom made tea, I walked through the rooms. The walls still had marks, faint dents where plates had hit, a chip in a doorframe, but now they just looked like history, not like warnings. For the first time, the house felt like it was truly ours. The next few weeks involved more hearings and paperwork. Dad fought back, but the evidence was too strong. The mistress disappeared after the audio recordings were played in court. His arrogance faded into weak denials. Finally, the verdict came. The judge's words were clear and steady. The house was awarded to Mom. The joint accounts were split fairly. He was ordered to pay restitution for old medical expenses and, most importantly, a permanent protective order was put in place. When the gavel fell, Mom put her face in her hands and cried, but they were tears of release. It's over, I said. She shook her head. No, Sarah, it's just beginning. On the day she received the new deed to the house, she placed it on the kitchen table. Her fingers traced the official seal. I never believed I'd hold this, she murmured. You held us, I reminded her. This is just the proof. She looked at me, her eyes shining. I used to think endurance was weakness, but maybe it was just strength waiting for its moment. I nodded. And today you got it. At night, I sometimes sit on the same porch steps where she used to sit alone and cry. The wood is old, but it doesn't feel haunted anymore. It feels safe. I think about the little girl who once whispered, "Stop," in a kitchen full of broken dishes. She grew up to be the woman who said, "Enough," in a courtroom. The difference wasn't just the uniform, it was a promise I had kept. The last time I saw Dad was months later, across another courtroom. He looked older and smaller. His eyes met mine for a second, but he quickly looked away. Mom stood tall beside me. She didn't have to say anything. Her silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was victory. People often think revenge is loud and fiery, but true revenge, the kind that lasts, is quieter. It's the silence of a woman who no longer trembles. It's the stillness of a daughter who no longer flinches. It's the calm after the storm, when the sky is clear and the house is still standing. That's what justice looked like for us. It wasn't a shout, it was a silence. If you are going through something similar, maybe you've had your own storms to endure. Maybe there have been shadows that whispered you were worthless, or voices that told you to stay small. Maybe you have endured more than anyone will ever know. I want you to remember this. Endurance is not weakness. It is the soil where strength grows. And when the time comes, when your silence finally breaks, you will find that you were stronger than anyone ever believed. So take courage, hold on, and when your moment arrives, stand tall. Because sometimes the quietest victories are the loudest of all.